They ruled with fear, escaped the impossible, and carved empires out of blood. But in the end, every one of them, Billy the Kid, Capone, Escobar, Madoff, even Bin Laden, met the same fate: silence, betrayal, and a grave they could never outrun. This isn't just the fall of criminals, it's the terrifying truth about every legend built on fear. Before they were legends, before the headlines, the manhunts, the fear, there were children. Small hands, hungry stomachs, thin silhouettes walking through streets that had already made up their minds about them. Poverty didn't just shape them, it chose them. And in the shadows of that choice, these boys took their first steps toward lives the world would never forget. The story begins in New York City, where the air tasted like coal dust and desperation. Tenement buildings leaned into each other like drunks, pressing in tighter every year as the poor flooded the slums. In one of those crooked rooms in 1859, a boy named Henry McCarthy was born. Later, they would call him Billy the Kid, the smiling gunfighter, the boy who killed and laughed and slipped through the fingers of the law like smoke. But long before the gun, long before the legend, he was just a skinny kid with blue eyes too big for his face. Orphanhood arrived like a thief. His father died before Henry truly knew him. His mother remarried, hoping for stability, but sickness swept in and dragged her away too. By 14, he had nothing: no parents, no home, no good choices. New Mexico's dusty streets became both cradle and teacher. The boy survived on odd jobs and charity, but starvation is a brutal mentor, and hunger teaches lessons sharper than any blade. One stolen piece of cheese. One shirt taken from a clothesline. His first crimes were tiny, almost pitiful, crimes committed not out of malice, but out of the simple, unrelenting instinct to stay alive. Yet something dangerous grew inside him, something the world had planted there, a belief that no one would ever protect him except himself. A different kind of child grew up in Lugo, Italy, in a modest home filled with ambition and disappointment. His name was Carlo Pietro Giovanni Guglielmo Tebaldo Ponzi, but history would shrink him down to something sharper, something almost mocking: Charles Ponzi. Ponzi wasn't born into violence. He was born into hope. Big dreams, romantic dreams, dreams that were too heavy for the fragile life he lived. He wanted more than the world offered him. More money, more respect, more meaning. And when he left Italy for America in 1903, he carried those dreams like a passport stamped with destiny. But America was not the golden paradise he imagined. It was a machine that swallowed immigrants whole. Factory floors, sweatshops, slurs and insults, thin paychecks and thinner opportunities. Ponzi was clever, too clever for the life he was living. Failure wasn't just discouraging, it was humiliating. And humiliation is its own kind of hunger. It gnaws at you. It whispers. It says, "You deserve more. You deserve everything." Ponzi's intelligence was a blade, sharp, bright, and dangerous. And he learned early that deception, when wrapped in confidence, looked a lot like opportunity. His first crimes weren't schemes of millions. They were small frauds, broken promises, manipulations born not of cruelty, but of desperation, of a man who believed life owed him more than his empty pockets suggested. Before he became the architect of one of the world's most famous scams, he was just a dreamer drowning in a world that punished people for dreaming too big. In Sicily, the air was different, salt-stung, sunburned, heavy with the smell of the sea and the weight of old codes. This was where Salvatore Lucania, later known as Lucky Luciano, took his first breath in 1897. His childhood wasn't marked by romance or innocence. It was marked by rules carved into the bones of the poor. Work.
Obey.
Endure. Survive. When his family sailed to America, they carried nothing except hope and a few bags. The Lower East Side greeted them with filth, disease, and violence. A new country, yes, but the same old chains. Luciano was not built for cages. School felt like a cage. Poverty felt like a cage. And the streets, hard, dangerous, unforgiving, felt like the only honest thing in his life. Street gangs didn't just tempt him, they embraced him. They offered belonging, power, identity. The older boys liked him, respected him, and he learned something that would shape his entire future. Crime was not chaos. Crime was organization. Crime had rules. Crime was a system. Luciano studied that system the way another boy might study math. The rhythms of extortion, the economics of illegal gambling, the politics of the streets. He wasn't a monster. He was a student, one whose classroom simply had no walls and whose teachers carried knives instead of textbooks. When he earned the nickname Lucky, it wasn't just because he survived a near-fatal beating. It was because he understood something others didn't. Luck favors the prepared. And he was preparing for an empire long before he knew it. 3 boys. 3 different worlds. But the same wounds. Poverty. Isolation. Desperation. The feeling of being invisible. Billy stole because hunger left him no choice. Ponzi schemed because the world refused to give him a future. Luciano joined gangs because power was the only antidote to fear. They were not born evil. They were shaped by circumstances that twisted their youth into something sharp and unforgiving. Before they held guns or created schemes or built empires, they walked through childhoods filled with traps. Every wrong turn felt like the only path available. Every crime felt like a survival technique. The world handed them violence, hunger, humiliation, and asked them to play fair. But no child plays fair in a game that was rigged before they were even born. These boys didn't grow into criminals. They grew into the roles the world crafted for them. Roles carved from pain, reinforced by necessity, and fueled by the belief that no one else would ever save them. In the beginning, you don't meet notorious criminals. You meet children. Children who looked at a world that rejected them and whispered back, "Fine. Then I'll build my own." Welcome my beautiful family and friends to my YouTube channel. Please click on subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. Thank you specially for sticking around to this very moment. Now back to the story. Every criminal has a breaking point, an invisible line the world forces them across. A moment where fear collapses into fury. A moment where survival becomes rebellion. A moment where a name becomes a legend. This part of the story is where boys become outlaws, and outlaws become myths. The New Mexico wind carried the smell of gunpowder and betrayal when Billy the Kid first stepped into the Lincoln County War of 1878. He didn't choose the fight chose him. What began as a business dispute between powerful men exploded into a battlefield of ranchers, hired gunmen, and corrupt sheriffs. In the middle of this chaos stood a wiry teenager with a revolver and nothing left to lose. Billy wasn't supposed to matter. He was just another orphan drifting from trouble to trouble. But violence has a way of revealing something in a person, something sharp, something dangerous, something the world had pushed too long. When Billy saw his mentor, John Tunstall, murdered in cold blood, something inside him snapped. Grief became gasoline. Rage became purpose. And the boy America had ignored picked up a gun and carved his name into the dust. He joined the Regulators, a crew of young men who believed justice wasn't given, it was taken. From that day on, Billy stopped running from trouble. He ran toward it. His speed, his aim, his nerve, they turned shootouts into stories, stories into legends. Every bullet he fired echoed across New Mexico until even men who never saw his face swore they'd felt his shadow pass them in the night. Billy the Kid was no longer a starving boy. He was an outlaw forged by war. A few years later, and 1,000 miles away, the streets of New York City trembled beneath a different kind of rise. Prohibition had arrived like a storm, shutting the doors of every legal bar in America, but opening 100 new ones in the shadows. This was the perfect world for lucky Luciano. He had spent his youth studying the language of power, fear, money, loyalty, betrayal. But prohibition transformed the classroom into something far larger. Bootlegging became the new gold rush. Smuggling alcohol became an industry. And Luciano saw what others missed. Crime could be a corporation. Crime could be structured. Crime could be a kingdom, with him on the throne. While other mobsters fought like wild dogs for scraps, Luciano thought bigger. He partnered with Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel, building alliances that crossed old ethnic lines. He spoke business. He understood efficiency. He saw the future, rackets organized like companies, profits flowing like rivers, violence used not blindly but strategically. And when he decided the old world bosses were holding back progress, he didn't hesitate. He orchestrated the end of their reign with cold precision. The assassinations of Joe Masuria and Salvatore Maranzano didn't just remove obstacles, they reshaped the entire underworld. The newspapers called it a revolution. The streets called it a bloodbath. Luciano called it business. From the ashes rose the Commission, Luciano's brainchild, an organized governing body for the American Mafia. For the first time, crime had structure, order, rules. Lucky Luciano was no longer a street hustler. He was a kingmaker built by prohibition. Meanwhile, Chicago was rumbling under its own monster. A man whose name would become synonymous with violence, money, and fear. Al Capone. He arrived in the city as a young enforcer with a scar across his face and ambition burning behind his eyes. Chicago in the 1920s was fertile soil for a man like him, bitter, corrupt, divided, and drenched in illegal liquor money. Capone moved fast. Too fast. He didn't rise, he erupted. With every rival crushed and every neighborhood bought or threatened into submission, he transformed the Chicago outfit into an empire. Gambling dens, brothels, breweries, speakeasies, he controlled them all. He was charismatic enough to charm the poor, generous enough to feed the hungry, and ruthless enough to bury anyone who looked at him wrong. But it was the St. Valentine's Day massacre that sealed his reputation in blood. 7 men lined up. 7 men slaughtered. A city shocked into silence. Capone denied it, but everyone knew. Everyone felt the chill. From that moment on, Capone wasn't just a gangster. He was a force. A shadow stretching across Chicago like a storm cloud. He had guns, money, soldiers, and the guts to use them all. Across America, something dark was blooming. Billy the Kid's shootouts made the West whisper. Luciano's reorganization made crime professional. Capone's violence turned cities into battlegrounds. Different men, different decades, different motives. Yet their stories shared the same heartbeat. Rebellion. Blood. Transformation. Each man was shaped by chaos, and in return, reshaped the world around him. America was changing. Law enforcement was scrambling. Newspapers were bleeding ink with stories of gunfights, massacres, escapes, and empires built on crime. Billy the Kid became a myth of the Wild West. Luciano became the architect of the American Mafia. Capone became the face of Prohibition-era terror. Their names began to echo across state lines, courtroom transcripts, and grainy photographs pinned to the walls of police stations. They were different chapters of the same dark book, one written in ambition and sealed with violence. Fear grew. Cities trembled. And somewhere in the shadows, the next generation of criminals began taking notes. Because legends don't just rise, they inspire. And the louder America screamed their names, the more unstoppable they became. Empires are not born in chaos. They're carved slowly, deliberately, by men who understand one truth better than anyone else. Power isn't taken. It's engineered. In the shadows of America's booming cities, for men rose not as criminals, but as architects. They didn't simply break laws. They redesigned the underworld into a vast, humming machine. This is the story of how crime stopped being impulse and became industry. The first architect wore a suit instead of a gun. Charles Ponzi didn't need bullets. He had promises. America in the early 1900s was a land hungry for opportunity. Immigrants, families, businessmen all reaching for prosperity they could barely touch. Ponzi saw that hunger and crafted something irresistible, something elegant, something dangerous. He invented financial seduction. One coupon. One tiny difference in international postage rates. He spun it into a dazzling tale of global profit. "Give me your money," he whispered, "and I'll double it." People didn't just believe him. They worshipped him. Lines wrapped around city blocks. Investors mortgaged their homes just to get a piece. For a moment, He was the man who made ordinary dreams shine gold. The beauty of Ponzi's empire wasn't in its finances, it was in its psychology. Confidence was his currency. Charm was his weapon. People weren't buying profits. They were buying hope. And Ponzi, with a smile that could disarm suspicion itself, built a financial machine so seductive that America didn't realize it was being drained until it was too late. When the empire collapsed, it exposed a terrifying truth. Sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones who never hold a gun. At the same time, in the underbelly of New York, another mind was building something far more enduring. Lucky Luciano, who had risen from street scuffles to prohibition riches, wasn't satisfied with power. He wanted structure. The old Mafia bosses preached tradition, blood ties, family loyalty, Sicilian codes. Luciano saw inefficiency. He saw outdated customs wasting money, losing opportunities, sparking needless wars. So he did the unthinkable. He tore the old world down. With a few carefully placed betrayals and 2 perfectly timed assassinations, he ended the era of the Mustache Petes. In their place, he built the Commission, a governing council of America's most powerful mob families. It was brilliant, cold, businesslike. Crime would now operate like a corporation. Disputes mediated, profits shared, territories defined. He didn't just unify the mafia, he industrialized it. Under Luciano, organized crime expanded like a corporation, entering new markets. Gambling, narcotics, extortion, nightclubs, ports. Every operation threaded into one national network. He understood something crucial. Actual violence wasn't the goal. The threat of violence was enough. Luciano didn't build a criminal empire. He built a system, one powerful enough to outlive him for generations. But every empire needs a mind behind the numbers. Enter Meyer Lansky, the quiet one, the thinker, the shadow in the back room. He never looked like a criminal. Thin frame, calm eyes, polite conversation. But beneath that small exterior was a mind sharp enough to cut steel. Lansky believed in mathematics the way other men believed in miracles. And he used numbers as weapons. While gangsters fought turf wars with guns, Lansky fought them with ledgers, creating casinos, running laundering networks, managing offshore accounts from Cuba to Switzerland. If Luciano was the CEO of the American underworld, Lansky was the CFO, the man who made sure the machine never stopped humming. He moved money like a magician, cleaning it, multiplying it, hiding it. He built international pipelines for gambling profits long before the FBI understood what was happening. His genius wasn't violence, it was invisibility. He stayed out of headlines, out of police reports, out of the public imagination. A ghost with a calculator. A shadow who built fortunes. And because of him, organized crime wasn't just powerful, it was profitable beyond imagination. Meanwhile, in Chicago, the machine took on a different shape. A louder shape. A brutal shape. Al Capone didn't care about elegance or psychology. He believed in one thing: domination. Chicago wasn't a city to him, it was territory. Every bar, every alley, every warehouse was either his or it would be. While Ponzi seduced and Luciano strategized, Capone controlled. He controlled politicians. He controlled judges. He controlled police chiefs with envelopes thicker than their ethics. His empire ran on alcohol and fear. Illegal breweries pumped out fortunes. Long caravans of armored cars carried contraband through the night. Gunmen patrolled streets as if they were battlefields. And when rivals challenged him, Capone didn't negotiate. He annihilated. The St. Valentine's Day massacre wasn't just a hit, it was a message carved into Chicago's spine. 7 bodies. 45 bullets. A city paralyzed. Capone didn't hide behind shadows. He was the shadow. He shaped the rise of federal law enforcement, forcing America to confront the reality that one man, one criminal, could hold an entire metropolis hostage. Even when he was finally arrested, it wasn't for murder or bootlegging. It was for tax evasion, paperwork, a technicality, proof of how far his empire extended. Together, these men, Ponzi, Luciano, Lansky, Capone, redesigned the world of crime, not as chaos, not as rebellion, but as infrastructure. Their fingerprints marked every smuggled bottle, every fixed casino game, every laundered dollar, every politician whose silence was bought with blood or gold. They didn't think like criminals. They thought like kings, like CEOs, like founders of an empire built on fear, opportunity, and inevitability. Here, crime stopped being personal. It became industrial, efficient, mechanized. A machine made of greed and ambition, and powered by the men bold enough to build it. There comes a point in every outlaw's rise when ambition outgrows fear, when survival is no longer enough, when power demands payment and always demands it in blood. This is the turning point, the part of the story where the legends stop running, stop hiding, stop negotiating, and start killing. Here, violence is not chaos. It is currency. And every one of these men paid, and collected in full. The desert wind carried whispers of death long before Billy the Kid pulled the trigger. New Mexico was a lawless canvas, and Billy painted it with the sharp report of a Colt revolver. At first, he killed because he had to. Ambushes, sucker punches, corrupt sheriffs, rival gunmen. Every confrontation was a coin toss between life and death. And Billy, with reflexes that seemed almost supernatural, kept winning. But something changed in the aftermath of the Lincoln County War. Survival turned into vengeance. Cold, hot, intoxicating vengeance. He hunted the men who betrayed him, tracked them like animals, waited in shadows, struck with the precision of a ghost. Witnesses said he moved like a flicker of light, here 1 second, gone the next. A laugh in the darkness. A bullet before the echo. Billy the Kid wasn't just killing anymore. He was making statements. Every body he dropped hardened his legend until New Mexico trembled at the sound of spurs on wooden floors. Mothers told their children to behave or the kid would come for them. Sheriffs formed posses. Bounty hunters circled like vultures. And still, Billy lived, fought, and slipped away every time. A young man becoming a myth through the barrel of a gun. Meanwhile, Chicago wasn't whispering. Chicago was screaming. Al Capone didn't believe in shadows. He believed in domination. His rise created enemies, and enemies demanded answers written in blood. So, on a cold February morning in 1929, Capone delivered the answer that would define him forever. This St. Valentine's Day massacre wasn't a crime. It was choreography. 7 men lined against a wall. 4 gunmen dressed as police. 2 Thompson submachine guns spitting fire. In less than 10 seconds, 100 bullets tore flesh, bone, and history apart. When it was over, the walls dripped red. Capone was miles away, but everyone knew. Everyone felt it. Chicago fell silent, as if the city itself held its breath. For the first time, America realized one man had become powerful enough to turn a metropolis into a battlefield. Capone didn't just kill his enemies. He erased their futures, their families, their hope. Journalists wrote his name with trembling fingers. Politicians swore to bring him down. Children shrank at the sound of his nickname. Violence had become his language, and the whole world was forced to listen. While Capone painted Chicago red, a new kind of outlaw took center stage across the Midwest, flashier, faster, and far more theatrical. John Dillinger didn't just rob banks, he performed them. He walked through doors with a grin, jumped onto counters with the swagger of a movie star, apologized to frightened customers, promising he only wanted the bank's money, not theirs. But behind the charm was chaos. Dillinger's gang shot their way out of police traps, left officers bleeding in alleys, and turned every heist into a life-or-death showcase. His jailbreaks, especially the infamous wooden gun escape, humiliated law enforcement so severely that J. Edgar Hoover himself declared war. Every robbery escalated. Every escape got bolder. Every bullet hit closer to home. Dillinger wasn't a thief anymore. He was a symbol, a nightmare wrapped in charisma and headlines. And then came Bonnie and Clyde, the lovers who traded romance for gunpowder. Where Dillinger danced, Bonnie and Clyde burned. Gas stations, banks, rural stores, the Barrow Gang hit them all. Every robbery ended the same way. A shootout. Screams. Bodies on concrete. Shell casings scattered like confetti. The couple became legends long before they died. Newspapers published their photographs, turning their crimes into entertainment. But behind the glamour was brutality. Police officers gunned down, bystanders caught in crossfire, blood staining dusty Texas roads. Every time the law got close, Clyde stepped on the gas, and Bonnie raised her weapon. Ride or die wasn't a motto. It was a prophecy. And in May 1934, when their car was torn apart by 150 bullets, the prophecy came true. The world understood. These were not lovers on the run. They were killers who lived fast and died faster. But even their violence paled in comparison to the storm rising in Colombia. Pablo Escobar was not just a criminal. He was a war. When his cartels swelled with billions, Escobar unleashed violence on a scale America had never imagined. He didn't just kill rivals, he wiped out entire families. He didn't just bribe judges, he blew up the ones who refused. He didn't threaten the government, he declared battle on it, leaving bodies in the streets and smoke rising from bombed buildings. Journalists murdered. Presidential candidates assassinated. Police officers executed daily. Entire neighborhoods ruled by fear. Escobar's empire was built on cocaine, but maintained by rivers of blood. Cars exploded. Courthouses crumbled. Airplanes fell from the sky. Innocent passengers sacrificed so one man could send a message. His power was so vast that Colombia split into two worlds, the one Escobar controlled and the one he would soon conquer. He wasn't a criminal. He was a catastrophe. This is the age of unleashed violence. The chapter where ambition demanded sacrifice, and each man delivered more than anyone expected. Billy the Kid's gunshots echo through the Old West. Capone's massacre freezes Chicago in fear. Dillinger and Bonnie and Clyde turn robbery into carnage. Escobar transforms terror into daily life. Different eras. Different motives. One truth. Violence became their signature. Fear became their legacy. Death became the price of their rise. At this point, the countdown had already begun. Every legend was now racing toward the same final destination, a fall written in the same blood that elevated them. Every monster has two faces. One the world fears, and one the world falls in love with. The most notorious criminals in history understood this better than anyone. They learned to weaponize charm, to disguise violence under silk smiles, to build entire empires behind masks polished to perfection. And in doing so, they became something far more dangerous than killers. They became icons. Before he became a ghost on FBI Most Wanted posters, John Dillinger was America's favorite outlaw. He robbed banks the way movie stars delivered lines, smooth, confident, devastatingly charismatic. Women swooned at his grin. Reporters followed him like paparazzi. Even the crowds fleeing his heists would later admit. He was polite, almost gentlemanly. It was a performance, of course. A mask crafted to perfection. Dillinger didn't just steal money, he stole hearts. Behind the charm lay a trail of bodies, shootouts, and escalating violence. But people chose the story they wanted to believe. A rebel against the rich. A modern Robin Hood. A man fighting the system. In reality, he was fighting boredom. Using violence as entertainment, each robbery another act in a show where he always played the lead. This was the magic of the double life. The world loved a man they should have feared. And then there were Bonnie and Clyde, the star-crossed lovers of the underworld. Newspapers painted them as tragic heroes, two young souls clinging to each other while escaping a cruel world. But their reality was anything but romantic. Their getaway car always smelled of gunpowder. Their hands were always trembling, sometimes from adrenaline, sometimes from the weight of what they'd just done. Behind every newspaper glamour shot lay a cold fact. They killed people. A lot of people. Police officers, store clerks, bystanders. The couple left graves in every state they visited. But the public didn't see blood. They saw poetry. They saw passion. They saw two kids who refused to bow to authority. Bonnie and Clyde didn't correct the lie. They fed it. They posed for photographs. They wrote poems. They let the world believe in their love story. A story that only ended when their bodies were torn apart by a hail of bullets, 150 shots separating truth from myth. On the opposite side of the spectrum, Al Capone mastered a different kind of mask, the mask of a good man. Chicago knew him as Scarface, the bootleg king who gunned down rivals without hesitation. But the poor knew him as the man who fed the hungry. During the Great Depression, Capone opened one of the first soup kitchens in the country. Meals served, 5,000 a day. Newspapers photographed smiling families sitting at tables he paid for, clutching bowls of hot soup, never daring to imagine that the man funding their dinner also ordered executions before breakfast. Capone's genius was simple. He blurred the lines. To some, he was a monster. To others, a savior. Both versions were true. And that is what made him terrifying. He showed the world a dangerous truth. Good deeds make excellent camouflage. But no one perfected the mask like Pablo Escobar. To the citizens of Medellin's poorest neighborhoods, Escobar was a saint. He built homes for the homeless, soccer fields for children, schools where none existed. Thousands lived better lives because of him. Yet those same neighborhoods shook during the night with the thunder of bombs he ordered. Judges assassinated. Politicians blown apart. Entire buildings destroyed because someone dared oppose him. Escobar told his people, "I am your protector." And in a way, he was. But he was also their executioner, their warlord, their nightmare. To the poor, he was hope. To the wealthy, he was terror. To the government, he was a catastrophe. Escobar didn't live a double life. He lived a double truth, one holy, one hellish. Then came the man who mastered the quiet mask, the mask of legitimacy. A villain whose smile never cracked, whose suits never wrinkled, whose words were always warm. Bernie Madoff. Unlike the gangsters who carried guns, Madoff carried credibility. He spoke in soft tones. He shook hands firmly. He donated generously. He operated at the highest levels of finance with the grace of a seasoned statesman. Behind that polished exterior, he ran the largest Ponzi scheme in history. While investors toasted him at galas and charity events, their life savings were evaporating in his hands, funneled into a pit of lies he had spent decades cultivating. Madoff's brilliance wasn't in his fraud. It was in his performance. He made people feel safe. Safe enough to trust him. Safe enough to give him everything. And when his empire collapsed, it wasn't just money lost, it was faith. Faith in institutions. Faith in humanity. His smile was the sharpest knife of all. But perhaps the darkest mask belonged to a man who lived as both predator and protector. Whitey Bulger, the king of Winter Hill, terrorized Boston for decades. He extorted, tortured, murdered, yet somehow evaded consequences long enough to become a ghost story parents whispered to keep their children in line. The secret? He was working with the FBI. Bulger fed agents information about rival gangs while killing his enemies with their blind protection. He wasn't just playing both sides, he was controlling both sides. Those who trusted him died. Those who feared him died. Those who opposed him died. His mask was built from betrayal, layered so perfectly that even seasoned agents couldn't see through it. Whitey Bulger proved the most terrifying truth of all. A criminal protected by the law is unstoppable. This is the heart of the double life. A world where every smile is a threat, every handshake a deception, every good deed a distraction. Dillinger dazzled America with charm. Bonnie and Clyde sold tragedy as romance. Capone fed the poor as he filled morgues. Escobar built houses while bombing cities. Bulger was both informant and executioner. Madoff wore respectability like armor while stealing billions. The world saw the mask. History remembers the monster beneath. Because in the end, the most dangerous criminals are not the ones who hide in darkness. They are the ones who convince you to step into it willingly. Every criminal believes they can outrun fate, until fate puts on a badge. In this chapter, the walls close in. All the masks fall. And the kings of the underworld learn the oldest lesson of all. You can escape the law, but you can't escape the consequences. The beginning of the end arrives quietly, on a hot July night in Chicago. John Dillinger, America's movie star outlaw, is walking beside a woman in a red dress. Crowds flow around them, unaware that the FBI has been watching from the shadows for hours. Dillinger moves with confidence, as if the street itself is part of his performance. He doesn't realize he's already been betrayed. The lady in red, Anna Sage, had struck a deal. Give up Dillinger and save herself from deportation. Her perfume lingers in the air as agents close in. Her footsteps slow. Her eyes flicker. That is the moment Dillinger's empire collapses. Outside the Biograph Theater, gunfire erupts. Bullets slice the night. Dillinger runs, because running is all he's ever known. But this time, he doesn't make it far. He falls face first onto the pavement, blood pooling beneath the outlaw who once danced through bank vaults like a star on stage. The newspapers call it justice. But everyone knows, he was killed not by a bullet, but by betrayal. In the dust and heat of Louisiana, another betrayal brews. Bonnie and Clyde, the lovers who became America's darkest fairy tale, had been running for 2 years, sleeping with guns under their pillows, driving through the night, switching cars like clothes. But the world around them was shrinking. Former allies turned informants. Desperation made friends dangerous. Clyde trusted one man too long, Henry Methvin, and his father struck a deal with the law. One morning, as the couple cruised a quiet country road, the trap was set. No warning, no negotiation, just silence, then thunder. More than 100 bullets ripped through metal, glass, and flesh. The air filled with smoke and screams. When the shooting finally stopped, Bonnie's body slumped against Clyde's, both riddled with holes, as if the world had tried to erase them entirely. Romanticized in life, shredded in death. Their love story ended as violently as it had begun. But if America specialized in ambushes, Colombia specialized in war. For Pablo Escobar, the manhunt wasn't a chase. It was a siege. For years, he had dodged soldiers, snipers, helicopters, spies. His wealth bought hideouts, loyalty, and tunnels. But as the government closed in, and the Medellin cartel crumbled under its own carnage, Escobar's world shrank to a single safe house. One December afternoon in 1993, the hunt reached its final chapter. Escobar looked out a window, saw the search teams converging, and ran, not through corridors, not through armored doors, but barefoot onto the rooftops of Medellin. Bullets whipped past him. Tiles shattered under his feet. The man who once commanded armies now fled like a frightened animal across red clay roofs. For a moment, it seemed he might escape again. He had slipped away so many times before. But this time, the world refused to let him vanish. A single bullet, fired by a Colombian policeman, ended the most violent criminal reign in modern history. Escobar fell on a rooftop. No empire, no army, just a barefoot man surrounded by the ruins of his own ambition. Across the ocean, a different kind of ghost was fading into the night. Whitey Bulger, the king of Boston's underworld and secret FBI informant, felt the net closing around him in the mid-1990s. Betrayal was coming for him too. But Bulger didn't run with chaos. He ran with calculation. He disappeared. Not for a week. Not for a year. But for 16 years. Under fake names, false passports, and uncanny discipline, he vanished into ordinary neighborhoods, grocery stores, beaches, quiet apartments. He lived like a retired grandfather, even as the FBI plastered his face across every airport and television screen in America. He became a myth, a rumor, a ghost story whispered in South Boston bars. But ghosts grow arrogant. In 2011, a tip from an unsuspecting neighbor finally cracked the illusion. Agents stormed his Santa Monica apartment, ending the longest manhunt in FBI history. Bulger didn't fight, didn't run. He just smirked, as if the chase had been the best part. But no fugitive in history turned escape into an art form quite like El Chapo Guzman. Where others fled through doors or down alleys, El Chapo fled beneath the world. His first escape in 2001, vanishing through a prison laundry cart, was legendary enough. But his second escape? It was something no one had ever imagined. In 2015, guards noticed something strange in his cell, a shower floor that echoed. Beneath it lay a tunnel, perfectly lit, perfectly ventilated, stretching a mile through solid earth. It led to a waiting motorcycle on rails, ready to whisk him into darkness. It wasn't an escape. It was a masterpiece. For months, he evaded capture, protected by loyal soldiers, bribes, and terrain as unforgiving as he was. But even legends run out of miracles. In 2016, after a gun battle in the mountains, El Chapo was captured one final time, and this time, the U.S. made sure there would be no tunnels, no motorcycles, no shadows to slip into. He now sits in ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies, a place designed to kill hope, silence, and escape itself. This is the truth of the manhunt. Every empire collapses from the inside. Dillinger's charm couldn't save him from betrayal. Bonnie and Clyde's loyalty couldn't save them from a setup. Escobar's wealth couldn't save him from a single bullet. Bulger's caution couldn't save him from a neighbor's curiosity. El Chapo's tunnels couldn't save him from a final, inevitable end. The law didn't defeat these men. Their own lives did. Every choice, every killing, every lie, they all circled back, tightening the noose around their necks. In the end, the chase wasn't between criminals and police. It was between men and their pasts. And the past always runs faster. Every empire, no matter how violent or brilliant or feared, ends the same way, in silence. Not the silence of peace. The silence of consequence. The silence that waits at the end of every outlaw's road. This final chapter is not about power. It is about the price of it. A price every titan eventually pays. The first to fall was a boy who never got the chance to grow old. Billy the Kid, the myth who danced through bullets and laughed in the faces of sheriffs, died not in a gunfight under the blazing New Mexico sun, but in a darkened room. A quiet house. A shadow by the doorway. A single flash. Sheriff Pat Garrett pulled the trigger. Billy didn't even have time to draw. The world had turned him into a legend, but death reminded everyone he had always been just a young man running from ghosts he never escaped. He died at 21, with the outlaw myth still half-written, tragic, unfinished, eternal. The boy who refused to bow finally bowed to time. Across the ocean in Italy, another titan reached the end of his reign. Lucky Luciano, architect of the American Mafia, the man who built the Commission and shaped organized crime into a corporate empire, collapsed on the cold floor of an airport. He had been meeting a filmmaker, the first man who wanted to immortalize his story on screen. A story Luciano had once written with bullets and betrayal now ended with a heart attack in a place that wasn't home, in a country that tolerated him but never embraced him. His death was quiet. No shootout. No rivals. No headlines screaming catastrophe. Just a man who outlived his world but could not outrun age. Chicago's most feared king met his end long before his body gave out. Al Capone, who once ruled an empire of speakeasies, brothels, bombings, and execution squads, faded into a shell of the man he had been. Syphilis chewed at his brain until the Don who terrified a nation could no longer remember the crimes he built his kingdom on. Reporters once trembled before him. Now they wrote of his confusion, his hallucinations, his decline. Capone, the man whose name once struck terror, spent his last days feeding ducks behind his Florida home, a king stripped of kingdom, soldiers, and even memory. Violence had made him powerful. Disease made him human again. South America's most feared monster fell next. Pablo Escobar, the man who ordered car bombs like business transactions, the drug lord who made presidents hide behind armored walls, died barefoot on a rooftop in Medellin. One bullet ended what thousands of enemies could not. The world watched the photos of his corpse, bloated, bloodied, slumped. But the real tragedy was the city around him, the ruined neighborhoods, the grieving families, the trauma etched into a generation. Escobar didn't just fall. He left a crater where his shadow once stood. Some empires die. His exploded. In a foreign land far from the streets he once dazzled, another fallen king died alone. Charles Ponzi, the man who invented financial seduction, the man who convinced tens of thousands that he could turn pennies into fortunes, ended his life broke and abandoned in Brazil. He who once drove luxury cars and basked in crowds was buried in a cheap grave, his name spoken only as a warning. Notorious in life, empty-handed in death. The creator of the world's most famous illusion died with nothing but the truth. The man who perfected a quieter brand of deception, Bernie Madoff, died not in luxury, not in a penthouse, but inside a cold federal prison. The king of Wall Street fraud, who had once moved billions like a conductor leading an orchestra, spent his final years as inmate #61727-054, surrounded not by admirers, but by walls. His death echoed across financial institutions, retirement accounts, charity foundations, places he had crippled with a smile. There was no ceremony, only paperwork, a reminder that white-collar crime bleeds just as much as gunfire. Then came the fall of a man who declared war on the West. Osama bin Laden, the architect of the deadliest attack on American soil, spent a decade hiding in shadows, moving between caves, safe houses, bodyguards, wives, nightmares. But the world never stopped hunting him. On May 2, 2011, the silence of a Pakistani compound shattered under the boots of Navy SEALs. Minutes later, bin Laden, once the most feared man on earth, was dead. No trial, no negotiation, just the abrupt end of a reign built on terror. Death came quickly, justice came colder. And still, one titan remained, alive, but buried within a place designed to break souls. El Chapo Guzman, the escape artist, the tunnel king, the man whose cartels spilled more blood than many wars, now sits in ADX Florence, a supermax prison where time itself feels frozen. There are no tunnels, no soldiers, no bribes, no shadows to slip into. Only concrete, silence, isolation, so complete it erases identity. El Chapo didn't die in a blaze of glory. He died in a different way, piece by piece, day by day, in a cage no man, no matter how powerful, has ever escaped. His fall is slow, cruel, inevitable. And so the story ends not with explosions or chase scenes, but with something quieter, something heavier. The cost. The cost of ambition. The cost of violence. The cost of becoming a legend. Billy the Kid's youth lost to a bullet. Luciano's empire reduced to an obituary. Capone's brilliance eaten by disease. Escobar's terror collapsing into rubble. Ponzi forgotten. Madoff imprisoned. Bin Laden erased. El Chapo entombed in silence. The world remembers their names, but not their victories. It remembers the aftermath. The bodies. The fear. The chaos they unleashed. Because legends fade, but shadows remain. Long after the criminals die, the consequences live on. After seeing how every king of crime eventually falls, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Is any empire, any fortune, any reputation worth a legacy built on fear? Thank you for watching the story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and share this video. Click on the screen to watch the next one.